Welcome back to the heat. Havana is home to the world's largest medical school. Thousands of students from developing countries are enrolled at the Latin American Medical School, tuition-free. The Cuban government hopes these young doctors will take their skills back home to serve their communities. Here once again is CCTV's Michael Voss.
The Latin American Medical School is housed in a former naval base on the outskirts of Havana, and all of the students come from abroad. This medical school is like a miniature United Nations. They're from Africa, Asia, the Caribbean, Central America and South America. And all of the students here are studying for free on full scholarships.
When I was back home, I heard that the best doctors came from Cuba, and since I want to be one of the best doctors, I came to Cuba to become a pediatrician.
Could you have afforded to go to medical school back home?
No, because the medical schools back home are very expensive, and since they're giving free scholarships, I took one.
I chose to study in Cuba because of the medical system. For example, they have a variety of clinics which will serve the public for free, in which in other countries, if you need to walk into a hospital, you'll think twice because it's expensive. That's what they are doing right here.
Juan Carrizo was the founding dean of the medical school.
From the first years of the revolution, we started participating very intensively with African countries, and our doctors work in all those places. Later, after two huge earthquakes in the region, our commander-in-chief, Fidel Castro, had the idea of creating the Latin American Medical School in order to train students who could then return to their countries as doctors. That's how the idea developed.
So far, more than 29,000 foreign students have graduated from Cuba, and a further 4,000 are currently taking classes here and at other medical schools on the island. They come from more than 100 countries around the world, including the United States. Cuba provides scholarships to underprivileged Americans under a deal worked out between Fidel Castro and the Congressional Black Caucus.
Cuba offers the places, but the decision about who comes is taken in their countries. They do the selection process to enroll students here in the school. We recommend that they come from poor families, young people who have less chance of studying, but it's up to each country.
Do you ask anything in return of the students for coming here and receiving free medical training?
We provide everything they need without any conditions or compromise towards the Cuban state. They are free when they leave to do what they want, logically, with their profound training in the ethical, moral, and human values of medicine, and with the concept of international solidarity. The majority of them, we hope, work with their people.
Michael Voss, CCTV, Havana.
Joining us once again from Havana is Gail Reeve. She's a journalist and co-producer of the documentary film Salo. And joining us from Johannesburg is William Gumede. He's an associate professor at the University of Witwatersrand and an author as well. Thanks to both of you for being with us for this second part of the program. William, let me start with you. South Africa has been a beneficiary, of course, of not just Cuban medical expertise. It's been a beneficiary of Cuban military expertise as well. South Africa has struggled with a shortage of primary care doctors. How has Cuba helped with this?
Cuba played a very big role, on two levels. The first level is, of course, the early 90s, Cuban doctors and medical personnel came to South Africa to work here. But increasingly, the last couple of years, South Africa have been sending students to go and study medicine, in Cuba. We've got a shortage of medical personnel in South Africa. Cuba has been very, very generous in training new medical personnel, whether it's medical doctors, or other specialists. So it's a two-way process. So, as I say, initially, it's just bringing medical doctors here from Cuba to help, especially in the rural areas of South Africa, where there really is a shortage of medical personnel. And now lately, actually training South Africans in Cuba itself.
Gail, when we look at some of these specific programs that Cuba has carried out in other parts of the world, we look at, for instance, the Ebola crisis in West Africa. There was a call for medical personnel from throughout the world to go to West Africa to try and combat this outbreak there. Cuba sent 165 health workers to Sierra Leone. It did so very quickly. Does Cuba have something like a medical rapid reaction force that it deploys around the world when these kind of crises happen?
Well, there is something called the Reeve Emergency Medical Contingent, which was actually created in 2005 in response to Hurricane Katrina, which hit the Gulf Coast of the United States and New Orleans very heavily, causing great loss of life. Although President Bush at the time did not accept the Cuban medical assistance or the offer of assistance, the team, 1,500 strong with another 1,000, went on to give relief in Pakistan right after the 2005 earthquake there. And since then has accumulated experience in about 24 other countries, most recently in Nepal, but also obviously in the countries stricken by Ebola. They have, I think, accumulated an enormous experience in emergency medical response, and that's something that we hope can be shared more broadly throughout the world, because I suppose Cuba's the one country that has the most experience in all kinds of situations, whether it's the snow-covered Himalayas or in Haiti after the earthquake there, which was a terrible tragedy, and where Cuban doctors and nurses are still serving today.
Right, and William, if we look at a longer-term plan or program that Cuba has implemented, it has completed a vaccination campaign against malaria in something like 15 West African countries. How was that effort carried out, and how was it received in those countries?
Yeah, no, of course, it's been very welcome. But you know what has happened, what Cuba has done since the end of the Cold War, it has reinvented itself. It's, you know, so it has been using its medical expertise as almost a soft diplomacy, you know, as a soft power to help other developing countries. And it's, you know, and of course, you know, in West Africa or you know, where it is in other African countries or in other developing countries, you know, Afghanistan or Pakistan and so on, you know, the Cuban help is very well received, and I think it has boosted Cuba's stature among developing countries.
Gail, here's a little interesting fact that I came across while researching this program. Margaret Chan, who's the director of the World Health Organization, she said, for once, if you are poor, female, or from an indigenous population, you have a distinct advantage. She was talking about medical training in Cuba here. In your experience there, do women have a distinct advantage in Cuba's program?
Yes, she was actually talking about the Latin American Medical School, and she visited there. She's visited there more than once, actually. The school was founded in 1998-99 and has since graduated almost 25,000 doctors for the developing world, making it the largest medical school program in the world by far, and certainly the largest with a social mission. It actually recruits purposefully young people who are bright from disadvantaged communities, indigenous communities, from poor communities throughout the world, and mainly in developing countries, but who have an academic record, who have promise, and who have also something very important, which is some commitment to go back to communities like the ones they've come from. And so this is what caused her to make that statement. And if you look at their student body today, you will find that there are over 100 ethnic groups there. Over half of the students are young women. And it is a very impressive project that I think is going to actually change the face of medicine around the world.
William, I'm just wondering, when we look at research and development in the medical field from Cuba, whether that kind of research and development is more relevant to a country like Africa, because we look at some of the R&D in the United States, it's very high-tech stuff. Developing countries cannot afford this stuff. So is the Cuban model more relevant?
Exactly, you know, the Cuban model, because you know, the Cuban model is really focused on primary health care. We've seen it in South Africa when Cuban doctors came here, and now that is really very relevant for developing countries and for African countries, because you know, because that really is where the great need is. The need in Africa and in other developing countries is often not at a high-end, sophisticated medical care, but really the basic medical care. But you know, secondly, with the Cuban model, I think the model has actually evolved, you know, over the last couple of years also to bring in, emergency medicine. So, where initially, immediately after, during the Cold War and immediately after the Cold War, Cuba focused on primary healthcare, basic healthcare, and exported that out. Now, the last couple of years, we've seen some very, emergency healthcare. The crisis is whether it's in Haiti or whether it's with Ebola, or whether it's in Afghanistan. So it seems to be now two levels of healthcare, which is very relevant for Africa and for developing countries. Primary healthcare on the one hand, and emergency healthcare on the other hand.